right. Good. It's on. Let's get down to work. It is a very nice book. We make lots of nice books. We can see many of them on the shelves around. And we're going to talk about Mishnah, which is a book that we started off as, bless you, talking, and then eventually got written down. But we are now in chapter 6 of Bava Kamma, and we are moving into a new topic, which is good because we have some new students too. So the new topic that we're going to be looking at is the damage done by an animal to something other than another animal. Right? Remember we talked about the whole, when a cow gores and attacks another cow or a person and what damages you're responsible for and all of that, right? Now we're talking about what happens if your goat gets out and eats your neighbor's garden, right? Who's responsible for what? So that's where we are, chapter 6, and you're going to see all of chapter 6 fits on 4 pages. It's a very condensed chapter, and we're even going to get past this. We're going to get into a little bit of fire in a few minutes. You okay? Oh, we have another. Wow, maybe I have enough copies. We'll just give them a second to come in. I don't want to. Probably Judy Chisdes. That's the Judy who has been coming, so that would be my guess. If I hear Judy and I know it's a Mishnah class, I'd be thinking Chisdes. Someone else, too?
Well,
there we go. Yes. Yeah.
Talking about today's part in the Mishnah, the lunch and learn.
Right, for the Torah, yes.
I have a question. I like to go sometimes, but I have an intention to buy.
Right.
I go to dealerships
Mm-hmm.
to test drive a car.
Right.
Is this okay?
So
Because you need to do research. You cannot.
right, yeah.
Buy.
So if you're thinking of buying, you can go to every dealership in the country and try every single car you want, as long as you could, or even if you could buy, right? But if you are completely broke and you don't have money for dinner, let alone a car, don't go to the dealership. Then that's when you're stepping across the line. Makes sense? It doesn't. When you go to a shop, it doesn't mean you have to buy from the shop.
No.
It means you could buy from the shop, and as long as you could, then it's their job to convince you. But if you can't, then obviously that's not fair.
You're wasting the time.
Exactly. All right. So Bava Kamma, chapter 6. Going to start with Mishnah 1, of course, and we are going to be doing the topic of the damage the animal causes to something other than another animal or person. Good? This is when it's chewing its way through the neighborhood. So unless we have somebody who would like to volunteer the whole night, I'm happy to take turns with reading.
I'll take the whole night.
All right. Fire away. Mishnah 1.
If a man brought his flock into a pen and shut it in properly and went out and caused damage, he is exempt.
All right. So case number 1. Pretty straightforward. You get the sheep in at night. I say sheep just because they're known for eating everything. You bring the sheep in at night, you lock them up in the pen and behind the fence, and somehow they get out during the night. You're not responsible because you did what was required. You're not responsible for something extraordinary happening. On the other hand, part A,
if he had not shut it in properly and went out and caused damage, he's liable.
but if you don't put them in at night, you just leave them out in the field and they go down the neighbor's yard and start eating their stuff, now you're in trouble. Right? Now you're responsible. So once again, as we've seen throughout Bava Kamma, God expects us to be responsible for that which we could predict, that which would be a normal behavior, that which there would be a reasonable expectation that a reasonably careful person would have done what they needed to prevent. And if you've done what a reasonable person should have done, and then something unreasonable happens, it's okay. But if you didn't do what you should do, and something happens, now you're in trouble. It's reasonable, right? Okay. Part 2.
If the pen was broken through at night, or bandits broke through it, and the flocks came out and caused damage, he is not liable.
All right. So they're going to give a couple of cases where this might be a problem. Right? You lock them up at night, but the bandits come, and as they're trying to break into your house, they damage the pen, and now the animals are loose and destroying your neighbor's stuff. You're not responsible for doing that. Same thing as if there's a tree falls and it breaks part of the fence, and now the animals are out. You're not responsible for that. Or even if the animals break through the pen, maybe there's a really strong ram and he smashes down the fence, and now they're out and running. You're, again, not responsible. You'll notice, however, it says at night, meaning that you wouldn't be aware of it. You didn't know this was happening. If you know that it's happening, then it's your responsibility to gather the flock back and prevent them from causing harm. Yes?
Yes.
All right. And then we get a lovely little twist in part 2a.
And if the bandits brought out the flock, the bandits are liable.
Right.
Meaning it was open the whole time.
Well, meaning if the thieves, as they were trying to get into your house, they go, I know, let's let the flock loose. That'll really confuse things, or then he'll be chasing the flock and then we can get in. If they open up the flock and let the sheep out, they're now responsible not only for whatever they steal, but they're also responsible for the damage the flock does to everyone else. So it's not just an accident that they got out, it was their intention. They are now responsible for someone else's animals causing damage to someone else's property. Make sense? Yeah, pretty straightforward. All right, let's see if we can make it a little bit more complicated in Mishnah 2.
Mishnah 2, 1. If he left the flock in the sun, or he delivered it to the care of a deaf mute, an idiot, or a minor, wow, so sweet. And it came out,
idiot is a technical term, right? Idiot doesn't mean what it's used casually nowadays, just meaning a stupid person. Idiot means someone not in their right mind.
And it came out and caused damage, he is liable.
All right. So if you left the flock out in the sun, that means, yeah, they're okay over on that hill. I don't need to worry about them, and I'm going to go home and take a nap. Or, of course, if you're giving them over to a deaf mute, which we talked about, what was it, 2-3 weeks ago, in antiquity, and really all the way up almost into the modern times, being a deaf mute wasn't just the case of they didn't know how to communicate, as modern science and research has shown very, very clearly. So, does there have someone at the door? Is it Natan? He has a key, yeah. A person who is born deaf, who is not given sign language or some other way to begin to develop a symbolic way of communicating, a language, will never mentally develop to their full potential, and will always be, to different degrees, but will always be very, very far behind the average for an adult. So when we say deaf mute, it's not picking on people who can't hear or can't speak. It's referring to the mental capacity that comes from growing up at a time or in a society where people who have that disability are not able to be helped from a very early age. And the research, as we talked about before, has shown no matter how much you try to help later, if they miss that window when they're a baby, it's very, very hard to get them back on the developmental course. And the same thing with an idiot. We're not talking about someone who's not smart. We're talking about someone who is not completely right in their head, who has severe mental illness. All right. So in all those cases, or a child who's not considered legally responsible by age, in all those cases, you didn't actually take care of the animals. You gave them either to a person or to no one that could not be legally responsible for the animals. Therefore, when they cause damage, it's your fault, right? Because you legally did nothing by asking your 10-year-old child to look after them. You may have thought you were doing something, and maybe it was better than nothing, but if they got out, it wasn't as good as it should have been, and the kid's not responsible, you are. You might as well have left them unattended. Good. Part A.
Part A. If he delivered it to a shepherd, the shepherd takes the place of the owner.
All right, so if you give them over to a professional sheep watcher, or anyone else in charge of the animals, a dog walker or something else, a cat sitter. I can't imagine a cat walker. If you give your animal over to someone who will be in charge of them, that's what their job is going to be, and they are neglectful and they allow the animals to get loose and to cause damage, then the person who was hired to watch over the animals, they're responsible. Right? Even though they're my animals, not his or hers, because they did not behave in an appropriately responsible way, they are responsible for the damages that are done. Make sense? Okay. Now it gets a little bit odd.
If the flock fell into a garden and derived any benefit, he pays for the benefit. What?
Okay. So what the flock is falling into a garden. We have skydiving sheep. No. Have people here been to Israel? Maybe a few people have been to Israel, and maybe outside of a city, if you've ever looked up at the hills, right, you'll see that many of the hills are terraced. They have steps, and those have been there for a few thousand years, right? Because the humans who first lived in Israel, they knew that trying to grow your crops like that is not as good. Make it flat, and then make a step and make it flat, and you can save the water, and the crops grow much better. Well, people would usually, make a little wall or a fence around if they were making a garden, and then that would be, they'd grow their stuff inside here. So you have to imagine if I have my sheep up here, that's a fluffy sheep, and the sheep wanders over to the edge and boop, falls in. Yeah, eat. That's what sheep do. They eat and they produce meat and wool. That's their job in life. And so it would just, and it's now trapped in the fence. So it's just going to clear out that garden area, right? It's perfect for the sheep. So there's a responsibility for the owner of the sheep to pay for, well, something. So what's the specific word that's used for what we're paying for?
Land.
No, what's the word that's used in our Mishnah? Benefit, right? And that's an important term, right? The sheep is going, the owner of the sheep will pay for how much the sheep has benefited from what it ate, which is different than the other, right? So what would be the other option?
Well, if the flock went down into the garden in its usual way and caused damage, he must pay for the damage it caused. Right,
that's the alternative, right? The alternative is, I don't care that your sheep got 1 day's worth of food out of it, which costs $5 to feed a sheep for a day. I'm just imagining sheep money. I don't actually know what it costs to feed a sheep, but imagine it costs $5 to feed a sheep. Your sheep is full. You don't have to feed it. You have to pay me the $5 worth of sheep food that the sheep ate. That's because it happened in a very odd and unpredictable way. So I can't hold you as responsible. On the other hand, if the sheep gets out and it's just walking down the road and it walks into my garden, which means you should have stopped it from doing so, then you have to pay me for the damages that the sheep caused. So let's take an example of somebody who grows artichokes. Right? Artichokes are expensive. And the sheep comes in and eats all the artichokes. Look like a green pineapple, right? And it eats all the artichokes or any other expensive vegetable. That could be like $500 worth of artichokes that sheep just ate. If the sheep came through in the normal way, which means you're fully responsible for predicting that a sheep would get out and do that if you didn't take care of it, you owe the owner $500. On the other hand, if the sheep is just jumping around and being sheep-like, and it jumps off the edge in something that's like, what are you doing, sheep? That's crazy. No, who ever heard of a sheep jumping like that? You're only responsible for $5 worth of sheep food, even though the sheep food were $500 worth of artichokes. So obviously, the owner of the artichoke field and the owner of the sheep will want to be very clear when they talk to the Beit Din, to the court, of exactly what happened with this sheep, because it's all about figuring out the responsibility of the owner for what the sheep has done. Good.
So I don't,
Yeah, what if the sheep is jumping,
Right.
jump over and break a leg
oh,
of the sheep? So who's responsible for the sheep?
The owner.
The owner.
yeah.
The
Yeah.
owner of the
It's
sheep.
your sheep. It broke its leg. Yeah.
No, not the owner of the field.
No, not the owner of the field.
Jump over. No.
Now, if the owner of the field broke the leg of the sheep on purpose, now we've got a problem, right? But if the owner of the sheep is just, if the owner of the field is just sitting there and a sheep jumps in and breaks its leg, that's not the owner's fault. And so too, as we talked about a little bit last week with the opening of a pit,
Yes, that
right?
was
The
the
bore,
next
exactly. I could tell, right? So if you have a pit on your property, and a sheep comes onto your property without your permission, and you did not invite it on, and the sheep falls into the pit and breaks or dies or whatever, the owner of the property is not responsible. Because I didn't ask the sheep to be here, and I don't have, there's no expectation that my backyard has to be sheep friendly. It's not my job to make my backyard friendly for your sheep that's jumping over the side. That's not a reasonable expectation.
But what if the sheep ends up in your backyard and eats your grass?
Then you have to pay for, if it comes in the jumping way, then you pay for the sheep food. If it comes through the side way, then if it kills all the grass, you have to pay to put new grass down and replace it.
So the owner is not responsible, it would be the owner of the house?
No, the owner of the sheep,
So the owner of the sheep is responsible
for the actions of the sheep, yes. Okay,
There's been a lot of tongue twistings.
and a lot of sheep going on here, I know. All right, so let's look at part 3 now, how we figure out how much money do you actually owe.
Yeah. How does he pay for the damage it caused?
Mhm.
Oh, continue.
That's just a rhetorical question.
Okay. They they assess.
They assess.
Oh, sorry. They assess what a
Say
sea's face of ground in that field was worth before and what is worth now.
All right. So there's. Go ahead and read Rabbi Shimon, and then we'll do the comparison.
The Rabbi Shimon says if they consumed fully grown produce, he must repay with fully grown produce. If they destroy on sia, he must repay 1 sia. If 2 sia, 2 sia.
All right. So what's the difference between the stama, the anonymous voice, and Rabbi Shimon? So the difference. I wonder if I can draw something like this. The difference would be something like this. We're going up in our drone and we're looking down at the field. So this is from the top. Right. So the first opinion, we'll call this the first opinion. The first opinion says, what is the field worth? Right. And the field, let's say it's worth $100. It's a $100 field. And they say, how much did the sheep eat? Oh, the sheep ate that in the field, right? That's what the sheep ate. So let's call it 25%. How much is the sheep going to owe?
25.
Yeah, 25%.
Exactly. You would owe 25% of the field, because that's the damage is going to be. What was the field before? The field was 100. Now what is the field? 75. What's the difference between them? 25, right?
But
So
the final product of the grow product.
what was that's where we're going to get into the thing, right? It's what is the field worth right now?
If you sell the product.
What is the field worth? If you were going to sell the field to your neighbor or to someone else, how much would the price of the sheep? How much would the price of the field be before the sheep, and how much would the price of the field be after the sheep? The difference, that's what you have to pay.
So it's not, for example, if you are growing artichoke and it's 25% is the ending product, the artichoke price in the market. No, it's the field.
The value of the field today. Exactly. And that way I don't have to guess. What was it going to be next week? What was it going to be 2 weeks from now? What would it have been if there was a really good deal on artichoke? It's just, what is it today? Or what was it yesterday? What is it today? What's the difference? Pay up. Rabbi Shimon, he's more precise. He's saying, look, what happens, this is the second opinion, right, Rabbi Shimon. He says, what happens if the field is not kind of even, right? What if there's some here that are full grown, and then there's others that are not, right? There's some things, like when you plant a field, you'll see some things grow faster than the others. And you can't just say the value of the field, you have to say the value of the plant. And how much was each one worth what the sheep has eaten. He wants to be very, very precise. And this opinion is ultimately rejected. Well, because, first of all, this is just a lot easier. And second of all, this isn't really going to ever be fair. Because how do you decide exactly each one? Now, the idea of being proportional, of how much damage was done, that's how much you owe. Everybody agrees on that. That you don't just say, hey, he damaged my field, give me $100. It's no, how much damage was done. But the sages go for a more general value of the field rather than value of the actual produce that was consumed.
Value of the field, what they mean? They mean the value of the land or the value of the produce?
Well, the produce, right? Because you're not unless the sheep was really bad and it ate all the dirt. You know, if as long as the sheep didn't ruin the land, then we're just talking about the value of the contents of the field. Yes, exactly. Okay, good. Katie, you ready for Mishnah 3?
I am. Mishnah 3, number 1. If a man stacks his sheaves in his fellow's field without his permission, and the owner of the field ate the sheaves, she is exempt.
All right.
I don't know what sheaves.
Sheaves are big bundles of wheat or barley or other grain.
Oh.
Right. So if you've ever seen those old pictures of farmers and they have the big stacks in the field of all the wheat put together, those are sheaves. So imagine I'm trying to get my field, harvested and cleaned up and ready. So I take all of mine and I put it in my neighbor's field so I can take care of my own field without any stuff in the way. But I didn't ask permission. I just, put it over on his side just for a couple hours, right? And while it's there, it's eaten. His sheep, his cow, whatever, comes up and eats my sheaves. And I'm like, hey, I only put them there for a minute. How come you're eating them? It's and sorry, you didn't ask permission. You get no protection, right? I'm the owner of the field. You didn't ask me to put the sheep here. When my sheep come and eat, well, what do you expect sheep to do, right? It's not my fault that my sheep ate in my field. It's only your fault that your stuff was in my field instead of where it should have been on your own property. Not but. We got an A, and then the B is but.
So you want me to read A and B?
Yes, go ahead and read them both.
If the beast was injured by them, the owner of the stack is liable. Part B. If he made the stack with the permission, the owner of the field is liable.
Okay, so B is the easiest part to get down, which is if I ask you, Natan, can I stack my wheat in your field? And you say, of course, I'm such a lovely man, I'm going to let you stack your wheat in my field. And then you let your sheep out, and they eat my sheaves, you're responsible for it. Right? Because but you knew I was doing it. You said it was okay. I know you love this whole cooperation thing.
Yeah, that's the problem in the past. You're punishing always the good actions.
Or you are creating personal responsibility. Exactly. So that's the way that part works. But part A is a little bit different. It's trying to say, imagine I put my grain in your field, and your sheep comes up to eat my grain. And while it's eating it, it chokes on the rope or something. I'm responsible, the guy who put the grain there. Even though it was your sheep eating my wheat, which he shouldn't have been doing. I'm so angry. It's still my fault, the sheaves grain, sheaves and sheep. It's my fault the grain was there to damage your sheep. Therefore, I, the owner of the grain, have to pay for whatever harm comes to your sheep that was eating my grain.
But with permission.
No, without permission.
Doesn't make sense.
Yes.
And sheep without permission is eating the product from a different field.
But it's on your field. It's on the sheep owner's field.
The sheep owner.
Right. And so I'm number one over here. I put my grain on your field with no permission. Your sheep comes and eats my grain.
Okay.
And while it's eating my grain, it gets hurt. Guy from field number one, I have to pay you for the damage to your sheep. Yeah, it does make sense. It's just, kind of the old saying, it's adding insult to injury. It's like, wait a minute, your sheep got hurt destroying my food, and I have to pay you because of it? Yeah, keep your grain on your own property. Or get permission before you do that. Okay. Mishnah 4. Now comes the fire. Right? So fire is a different kind of damage in Jewish law. Because, well, first of all, the Torah mentions it, but it's because it behaves differently, right? A fire doesn't have the normal ideas of ownership. The fire doesn't have the normal ideas of how it moves, of what it does, of how it, there's not some things that fire will eat and other things it won't. It's not like sometimes they'll kick and sometimes it won't. Fire is this different type of beast altogether. And so it gets special halacha. Like what? I could. Right. That's actually good. I like that. Then became the fire that burned the stick that the sheep ate and got sick on.
Oh, that was hard.
Yeah, that doesn't really flow off the tongue. All right, so chapter 6, Mishnah 4. Give me the fire, Katie.
1. If a person sends forth fire in the hands of a deaf mute, an idiot, or a minor, he is not liable by the laws of a man, but he is liable by the laws of heaven.
Okay, so I'm assuming this one's going to get some discussion. What's going on here? So this is me with my torch, and you're a minor, right? He's only 10 years old, and I say, all right, little Nathan, look after this. And then I go off and do something, and then when I turn around, he's lit. The whole forest on fire.
He dropped the pin too.
Yeah, you dropped it. You see, you can't even hold on to it. All right, little Nathan. Okay. So the question is, him, me, no one?
Well, earthly wise he is, but heavenly wise you are, because you knew better.
Half right. Earthly wise, that is to say, by the court, I'm not responsible. Right? By the court, I'm not responsible.
Because it's your field.
No, fire goes everywhere. Right? If I give you a torch and you set fire to the village and you destroy the village, I'm not responsible by the hands of the court.
What about the responsibility? The same example that before I have a problem.
Right.
You can use the same argument. By responsibility, you know that you are doing something incorrect, so you need to pay. It's the same argument.
Not quite. He's such a, I mean, but these are the good questions, and this is, what the Talmud has to work itself through of why here, not there. So first of all, let's just make sure we understand the general idea here, because before we get to the why not, we have to understand that you are responsible on a certain level, which is what they mean by responsible by the laws of heaven. So the argument here is that the court, the Beit Din, the community, the human court, can't take me to court and can't make me pay. But God absolutely holds me responsible for the fire that happened. So it's not saying that I am completely off the hook. It's just saying the court can't prosecute for what I did. So that's a very important distinction, because it's saying it's wrong, but we can't handle that. And that is a general rule in Jewish law. When there are things that are done on your behalf, but out of your control, then you are not responsible by the court, but you are responsible by heaven. So let me give you an example that's even more extreme. If I give you $1,000 to go murder someone, I'm not a murderer in the eyes of the court. I can't be executed. I can be punished for helping to murder, but I'm not actually a murderer, and therefore I would not be executed. You would be, because you killed someone. And even though you would say, well, I only did it because he paid me, and I didn't care about why I was doing it. Too bad, you did it. You can't push your guilt on me, and that's it. But as far as God's concerned, yes, I'm in trouble. The rabbis recognized that there were certain moments when the court couldn't prove the responsibility but they knew that God could, meaning that God could take care of any punishment and any responsibility that was needed. What's that?
Oh, it's God.
Well, because God's God, right? God knows exactly how this happened, why this happened, and what your role was in everything that happened. The human court can't, and therefore you're not responsible for the human court, but you are responsible to God. Because fire is this unique character, because fire has this different behavior and unpredictability that's different than an animal or animal and pits that we've talked about, then I don't have the same level of responsibility when I give it to someone else. It's out of my hands.
Also, if you destroy public property,
Mm-hmm.
because you are with your fire and your responsibility, you are destroying the community, the public sphere.
Just making sure that wasn't Penelope telling me, because earlier she had told me the sound had cut out. So yeah, but it's still
destroy the community and the public sphere. So in some way, maybe the community can really treat you and try you for responsibility.
Are people going to be angry at me? Absolutely. Right?
A public court cannot.
They can't get the money. They can't get the money from me because I technically didn't do it, because it wasn't in my hand last. And that's a unique status for fire, which is why it had to be spelled out, because we might have thought that it was like everything else we had done so far, which was you can't hand off the authority. But for fire, it has a unique status.
So they can't hold you accountable if you knew that this person was an idiot and deaf and you didn't know
Yes.
that? Even though, okay.
Right, yeah.
So
Even if you
by
knew.
accident, you didn't realize.
Right, even though I knew that he was only a 10-year-old, I'm still not responsible for the court to be able to seize my money to pay for the damages. God, on the other hand, knows exactly what happens, and God will take care of the real justice that needs to be done.
And real quick, they did pass a law now that if you are conspired, if there's a conspiracy that you have sent somebody to murder, you are considered, you get you're considered a murderer.
Yes.
And you get
American law has a different handle on that. But in Jewish law, we have always held that the person who does the action, the person who commits the sin, is the person who is responsible for the sin, even if somebody else put them up to it, even if someone else was paying them or egged them on or convinced them to do it, it's still the person who does the action that's responsible. The other person's no saint.
Well, I just remember that they didn't. They just now started making all these rules, making it stricter and harder.
Right. So there have been other rules regarding conspiracy. Well, there have been other rules regarding conspiracy to commit murder and such, or accessory to commit murder. But yes, they keep changing how they can try and bring people to justice who were ultimately responsible for the murder, even though their hands were clean. And Judaism says their hands are still clean of the actual murder. That doesn't make them a saint, doesn't mean that they should be put up for Man of the Year, but they are not actual murderers. And if nobody would murder for money, then they wouldn't be able to actually carry out the murder that they want to carry out.
Wait, when King David had Bathsheba's
Uriah, yes.
husband put in the front line to murder, God confronted him through a prophet.
Exactly right. But he was not punished as a murderer. He was punished as someone who had failed in serving as a good king. He was punished as someone who had not done what was right, but he was not considered a murderer.
So he's not considered having blood in his hands?
Not the same way that someone who actually commits murder is, yes. He's definitely considered to have failed and to have done something horrible, but not to the same degree. There's different degrees of being a bad person.
But neither the general.
Right. Well, Yoav actually changed what David had said to be done. Right? David said, put him in the front, and when everybody else is attacking, everyone else should retreat, leaving him out by himself, which is like the most obvious thing ever. And that's not what Yoav did. What Yoav did was put him in the most dangerous place, but all the people were sharing the danger. And it happened that he was killed, but it wasn't like he arranged for only him to be killed. So it was more accidental the way it was done in the end. But it was still arranged that he would have a greater risk than he would have normally had in the fighting. Okay, let's go ahead and continue with some fire.
All right.
Part A.
8, if he sent it forth in the hands of a person of sound senses, the
Mhm.
one of sound senses is liable.
Right? So if I give it to Natan, the 14-year-old, and Natan, the 14-year-old, burns down the town, Natan, the 14-year-old, is going to pay damages.
Already burned it.
Yeah, he already dropped it. So it's just pointing out that the person who had the original torch, careful.
No, I'm innocent.
It's just pointing out that the person who originally had the fire, by giving it to you, I've transferred all responsibility to what happens to it, and you are now fully responsible. Okay, part 2.
If one brought the fire and then another brought the wood, he that brought the wood is liable.
And go ahead and read part A.
If one brought the wood and then another brought fire, he that brought the fire is liable.
Liable, perfect. All right, so
Q&A says the same thing.
no, it doesn't. They are inverse. Who here remembers doing the fire triangle, the fire pyramid? Oh, you guys never learned this? In California, where forest fires are a big, big problem because everything is so dry, everybody learns the fire triangle, right? To get fire, you need fuel, heat, and oxygen. Right? You need those 3 components to make fire. The oxygen's already there. Now, in this particular Mishnah, we're only arguing about this and that. And it's basically saying whoever completes the triangle, that's the person responsible. So if I have a torch sitting there in the middle of an empty road, and someone else comes and puts a whole load of wood on top of it, and up it goes, and the village is in trouble, the guy who dropped the wood is responsible. Even though he could...
Action.
What?
Who complete the action?
Completing the action. Whoever completes
responsible.
that's the person responsible. And we're going to get to the oxygen in just a second, but whoever completes the action is responsible. Now, you might have thought that, well, hey, if you hadn't put the torch there, my wood wouldn't have caught fire. So therefore, it's the torch's fault. And the answer is no. The person who completes, the person who comes last is the person who should have noticed that there's a torch, and therefore not put his wood down on top of the fire. And same thing, if you have your torch and you're walking along and you're looking for a place to put it down, and there's a pile of wood, don't drop it in the pile of wood. And you can't say, oh, well, if I put my torch down on the road, it would have been fine. Who knew this guy was going to put a pile of wood there, just before I put my torch down? You're the last person to complete the process. You are responsible for the damage it causes. Even though it took both of you to make the fire, the last one is the one responsible, because that is the point that the fire became dangerous.
And the worst thing is if a car's coming by and if there's no brakes, pressing brakes is not working, he runs right through the wood.
And then spreads the fire. That's a little bit like what we're going to get in part C. Part B and C.
He has a problem with the argument.
Okay, well, let's get part B and C, because it's going to continue this.
Before this, okay?
Okay. About fire?
Yes, because if you continue with that lendency of
that line of thinking, right?
Okay, I thought I can be very sarcastic, okay, very ironic, and say, yeah, you know what? Actually, who's actually finally responsible is God, because He's the one that completed the triangle.
We're going to get there in just a second. We're going to get God on the hook. It's okay.
No, for the exception.
No, I know. Trust me. You're on the right path.
You should have been an attorney.
Or a rabbi.
If another, do you want me to read B and C?
Yes.
Okay, B and C. If another came and fanned the flames, the one who fanned the flame is liable. If the wind fanned the flame, they are exempt.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, but what's the wind? There's your God, right? There's your act of God, right? So if you've dropped your fuel and I've dropped my torch and someone else comes along and goes, whoof, 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 and now the fire goes up and spreads, the guy with the fan is the one who's responsible for the damages. But if the wind comes up and it makes it go up much more than was expected, and it comes up from a strong wind, the guy with the torch, the guy with the wood, we're not responsible anymore. It's out of our hands. right? Now we're talking the oxygen was brought by God.
Okay.
Yeah, that means God.
So yes, you follow that chain
Yeah,
to its
yeah.
conclusion.
And nobody is responsible right there.
No one's responsible for that. And that, that handles things that are sort of the weird accidents. So, you can imagine somebody, they get together for a beach party and I put down the wood and you put down the fire and we get the fire going. And then all of a sudden this wind comes out of nowhere, scatters the wood all into the village. And now there's trouble. I didn't, how?
It's like an I-4 about some year ago.
Mhm.
The wood get on fire and it's a lot of accident over there.
Right.
Yeah. What happened?
There was wood. There was wood burning near I-4, and so it caused a lot of accidents.
Yeah.
No, it's a fire. It's a fire.
Right. There's lots of different things that can.
It's
Yeah.
a lot of smoke.
Yeah. A lot of the smoke.
But still should be responsible in the court of the heaven, not the human, because still is about responsibility. They knew that there was a lot of wind that could have the
Who says they knew?
possibility. The two people that bring the food and
No.
heat.
When I was growing up, and again back in California where I learned all about fire, we knew that the wind could change in an instant, and we also knew that sometimes the day would be perfectly fine and the wind would come out of nowhere. And sometimes we would get what we call dust devils, where the wind would swirl all of a sudden and just throw the dirt up into the air. It was a lot of fun as a kid. But
in 1 minute could happen.
oh yeah, absolutely. It'd just be a normal day, and then all of a sudden you just get this whipping across the field of dirt, and you'd have this little mini tornado, and it would just be gone a minute later. Yeah. Look up dust devils on YouTube. I'm sure there are videos.
Well, then he dared.
Yeah, they mix and that's it.
I've heard it's water spout twisters.
Yeah, we rarer, but those would also happen in California, in San Diego. Part of it is because San Diego gets the cool air from the ocean and the hot air from the desert, and so we get a lot of mix, and that can happen. That doesn't mean I can never make a fire. Just because it might happen doesn't mean I can't make a fire. It means a reasonable person would know that on a reasonable day, making a fire is fine. And then something weird happens, I'm not responsible for the weird. Now, if it is a day where there's lots of wind going this way and that way and this way, and I decide to build a bonfire, now I'm responsible. Because that was clearly something that a person should not have done.
Now, what about Florida? Because we've had some major.
You have to, everything is according to the local region. Everything is according to what is locally considered reasonable, which is why this all gets handled by a court, not just by two arguing neighbors, right? It has to go to a court so that the judges can see what was the situation like, what were you doing, how careful was the person being, what was the weather like. That's what is all needed. You have to go down into the details of each case, but this gives us the basic framework of what questions you need to be asking.
Is the person liable if they throw the cigarette butts into the wood?
And that's the person who brought the fuel and the person who brought the heat, even though the fuel was already there. So yes, absolutely. And that happened all the time, unfortunately, when I was growing up in California. Yeah. Well, here you got at least lakes and things. California just, boom. All right. Part 3.
If a man sent forth fire and it consumed wood or stones or dust, he is liable. For it says, when a fire breaks, the fire shall surely make restitution.
Oh, you skipped a line.
Oh, if a fire breaks out and spreads to thorns so that the stacked corn is consumed, or the standing corn, or the field, he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution.
All right. So the idea here is that in the verse, which is what's being quoted here from the Torah, which talks about fire, it doesn't only say damages for the stuff, it also says damages for the field. Well, if I'm burning thorns and corn and standing corn, what's left for me to burn when it says I burnt the field? It's burning stone or wood or other things. Right? Any damage the fire causes, I'm responsible for. If that last word field wasn't in the verse, I might have thought I was only damaged for the produce that was destroyed by the fire. But because it makes it a more general statement, I now know that I'm responsible for burning up your tractor, not only for burning up your corn. And remember, by the way, when we read corn in old documents, we're talking about grain. We're not talking about the yellow stuff that we have in America. That's the Old English word for grain was corn. Confused me the first time I read an old Bible. It's like, what do you mean they had corn in Egypt? They didn't have corn in Egypt. Corn's from America. But it just means grain in Old English. Okay, good. Onward, part 4.
If it passed over a fence 4 cubits high, or over a public way, or over a river, he is exempt.
All right. So this is where, how much reasonable caution do you need? All right. If I have the fire in my backyard and I have a fence that's 4 cubits high, that's about 6 foot. Right. I don't expect the fire to go over the fence. The same way, if I'm making it on my side of the road and it jumps the road, which is about like 16 cubits across, it is 16, it says 25, almost 30 feet. If it can jump 30 feet, that's a lot more than one would expect. And of course, if it goes over a river, who would have thought my little fire burning the extra waste on this side of the river would get across the river and cause damage to your field? So you're not responsible if it goes above and beyond what a normal fire would do. And let's just go ahead and keep figuring out how much responsibility we have.
If a man kindle fire within his own domain, how far may it spread? And he will be liable.
Right, so this is the general question, and we're going to get 4 opinions.
And Rabbi Eliezer, did I say right?
Eliezer,
Eliezer, and then
Azariah,
says it looked at it. I mean, it is looked at if it was in the middle of a core space. Okay, that was tongue-tying. Sorry.
It is looked at as if it was in the middle of a core's space, right?
Yeah.
So he says it's a very narrow area. How much would the core of grain be spread out? That's your responsibility for damages. If it goes beyond that, you're not responsible for the rest of the damage, right? Because this was your fire. That's someone else's fire. On the other hand, Rabbi Eliezer.
Rabbi Eliezer says 16 cubits in every direction, like a public highway.
Right, so that's like 25, 30 feet all around you. That's how much damage you have. If the fire goes and continues beyond that, you're not responsible for the damages beyond it, because that's out of your control. That's, each one of them is giving an increasing measure of responsibility. Rabbi Akiva?
Yes, Rabbi Akiva says 50 cubits.
50 cubits.
50 cubits, I'm sorry.
50 cubits would be about 75 feet in every direction that you're responsible.
Why 50 cubits?
Why not? It's a nice round number. I don't actually remember ever reading a good explanation. But Rabbi Shimon is going to come with a very different type of measure.
Rabbi Shimon says, it is said, he that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. All is in accordance with the nature of the fire.
Right? So basically what Rabbi Shimon is trying to say is, because it says in the Torah, he that kindles the fire will make restitution, then it just depends on the fire you made. So if I made a little campfire and it destroys something, then my responsibility is much narrower. But if I make a giant bonfire, then I'm responsible for a bigger area because it's a bigger fire, and therefore it's more dangerous, and I needed to be more careful that it could damage something in a much bigger area. Okay, chapter 6, Mishnahs 5 and 6. Let's see if we can get these two done, and then we will have finished one chapter in one night. That's amazing. It's a short chapter. Okay, Mishnah 5.
If a man set fire to a stack and there were utensils and these caught fire.
All right, let's make sure we understand the situation. All right, I've got my wheat stack or my hay stack or whatever, and you stuck your rake inside of it, right? Utensils can be any like items or things. It's not like cooking utensils, right? It's like your rake, your shovel. You just stuck it inside of the stack. Maybe we're going to come back later today and you didn't want to carry it back to the house. And I set fire to this and it burns down and your rake is toast. Am I responsible or not? Mishnah first.
Rabbi Judah says he must make restitution for what was therein.
All right. So Rabbi Yehuda agrees with Yerach that when the guy burnt down the stack, he also is responsible for the stuff that was in it. However,
but the sages say he need only pay for a sack of wheat or barley.
Right. So the sages, the Chachamim say, no, not true. You're only responsible for what you actually burnt down. You're not responsible for the stuff that was in it. Now, why not? We'll get, tell you what, you know what we'll do? We're going to do part 3 first, and then we're going to come back to part 2, because part 3 answers part 1.
Okay. The sages agree with Rabbi Judah that if a man set fire to a large building, he must make restitution for everything there. For such is the custom among men to leave their goods in their houses.
All right, so what is the principle that the sages are agreeing on?
Whether you can expect to find extra things inside.
Exactly. If it is a situation where a reasonable person would expect that in addition to the stack or in addition to the building, there might be stuff inside, then when you burn it down, you're responsible for the stuff that's inside. But if there's no normal person, or very rare, that leaves stuff in the stack of hay, then when you burn it down, you only think you're burning down the hay, and therefore you're not responsible for burning his rake as well. So that's the rule of thumb that the sages use, which is, what's the normal expectation? If you burn someone's house down, you should expect that there's going to be stuff inside, because that's what people do. They put stuff in their house. It's why we have houses. And George Carlin has a wonderful comedy routine on stuff and having it in your house and all of that. If you've never heard it, it is hilarious. And therefore you're responsible. But if we don't normally think that people have hidden, paintings inside the stack of wheat, then when you burn down the stack of wheat, you're not responsible for paying for the painting.
So in this case, they agree with other units.
For the house, for the building.
For the stack
No,
and the tools.
because in their day, it was not normal to leave things in the stack of grain. Now, if in our community it was normal, right? If this was just what everybody always did was leave stuff in their hay. Oh, you okay? I know, it's a heavy subject. It's very passionate, yes. Did you cause any damage? If you broke the table.
That can break the group.
Scott. So that's the rule, right? Is what is the normal expectation? Again, much of what the Mishnah is trying to get us in all of these damage cases is to figure out the normal expectation for all of these semi-uncontrollable forces of damage. And in the next chapter, and in chapter 8, we start talking about the damages from people, where we have different expectations of how people should behave than we do about fire. But let's do part 2, which is going to be a little bit more confusing on the first read, and I hope we can figure this out without too much excitement or throwing of books.
On Mishnah 5 or Mishnah?
Mishnah 5, part 2.
Okay. But the sages say he need only pay for a stack of wheat or barley. You ready like that?
Yeah, part 2.
If a kid was fasting.
Remember, kid means baby goat.
Okay. If a kid was fastened to it, to the stack, and a slave stood nearby, and they were burnt with it, he is liable.
Okay, and go ahead and read the next one.
If there was a slave fastened to it, to the stack, and a kid stood nearby, and they were burnt with it, he is not liable.
Okay, so let's get the picture for the 2 different cases, right? We have case A, and we have case B. And we're going to use the same stack of grain just because I don't want to draw another one. So for stack A, we have a baby goat that is tied up to my stack. And remember, the stacks could be very tightly bound and be very heavy. So having something tied to a stack of grain is a pretty good anchor. And they would not easily be able to get away. And then over here, we have a slave. And I light the grain on fire. And of course, the goat is killed. And of course, the human being is killed that is standing nearby. Well, not of course, in fact, that's going to be an important part of what our argument is going to be. I am responsible for the damages done to both. And damages is the operative word. But if we have the slave tied to the grain and the goat is standing over here, give him a tail, and I set fire to this, remember it's only one or the other, and I set fire to this, and of course it kills the slave, and it also kills the goat, I am not liable for the damages. I am liable for murder. And we covered this a little bit a while ago. If you are liable for two penalties and one of them is greater than the other, only the top penalty counts, right? So I'm exempt from the property damage, but I am guilty of murder. Now, why am I not guilty of murder over here?
Because the man could run away.
Exactly, because he wasn't tied to it. So to it, I should know that I'm going to kill the goat, but I wouldn't know that I was going to kill the man. And you may remember as well when we talked about some of the issues earlier on, that the animals' expectations, or even the humans' expectations, which we haven't covered for the humans yet, but the animals we did, you remember when we talked about the bull rubbing against the wall and the wall collapses and kills someone, we don't call that bull a murderer because it wasn't trying to kill. When I set fire to this, I was definitely trying to kill the goat. There's no reason I would have expected to kill the human, because I would have thought he'd run away when there's a fire, because he wasn't tied. But over here, when he's tied, I am definitely trying to kill him, and therefore I am a murderer, not a property damager. Right? So when it says exempt here, we're not talking about you didn't do anything wrong. Right? We're saying you didn't do property damage wrong, you made murder, which is a worse wrong, and therefore you're exempt from the property. You're just going to be executed, only executed instead. Mishnah 6.
If a spark flew out from under the hammer and caused damage, it is liable.
Right, so blacksmith's hammering away, bang, bang, bang. I wasn't actually trying to start a fire. I wasn't using even regular fire. That's a very important distinction, not just here, but elsewhere as well, between the difference of superheated metal and actual fire. It becomes very important for understanding the conservative movement's ruling regarding electricity on Shabbat, because the Mishnah does make a distinction between superheated metal and actual fire. And here we see one part of that, which is if superheated metal was the same as fire, I wouldn't need to be told that superheated metal is treated like fire for the purposes of causing fire. Everyone follow that? Maybe? Right? If hot metal was the same as fire, then you don't have to tell me that when I drop fire, I'm responsible. But if hot metal is normally not treated the same as fire, then you have to tell me specifically, for this case, hot metal is treated like fire and you're responsible. Good. So blacksmith, hammer, be careful where you're hammering. Look around you, because if you start fires with all of your sparks, you're going to be responsible.
If a camel laden with flax passed by in the public domain and its load of flax entered into a shop and caught fire, the owner of the camel is liable. All
right, so flax is very flammable. It's a plant material, like fibrous stuff. It's what they make linen out of. And so you can imagine a camel with a big bundle on its back, and it's walking down the street, and it sort of leans into a shop. Think open marketplace, right? We're not like walking into Best Buy. It leans into a shop, and there's a lantern or a candle or something, and then whoosh, the fire goes up. The guy who had the camel is responsible, because you were providing the fuel, even by accident, to the heat and caused the fire. However,
but if the shopkeeper left his light outside, the shopkeeper is liable.
Right, I have a little lantern hanging outside my shop, and your camel walks along, and the lantern hits my camel's load. Now the shopkeeper is responsible because he left a hazard in the road. Except
Rabbi Judah says if it was a Hanukkah light, he is not liable.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Right? Why would you not be liable for a Hanukkah light?
Because Hanukkah lights are supposed to light.
Right, because they're supposed to have the Hanukkah light outside. Nowadays, most of us light it at least in a window where it's visible to outside. But in the ancient world, you would literally light your Hanukkah outside your property. And still, when you go through the old city of Jerusalem, it's one of the places you can see the best examples. People will have little Hanukkahot mounted on the gateway to their courtyard.
And they're oil too.
and their oil usually as well. And so people can light their Hanukkot outside. And nowadays they have these lovely glass enclosures, so we're not worried about camels catching fire on them. But the idea here, again, as we've been saying over and over again, is what is the base level of reasonable expectation, right? I'm reasonably sure that my camel shouldn't go into your shop because that's a danger. On the other hand, I'm reasonably sure that if I leave a fire outside my shop, someone's camel might get lit. On the other hand, if it's during Hanukkah, I'm reasonably sure somebody is going to have a Hanukkah in the street. And that means I have to be more careful with my camel. Right? It's all about what is the reasonable expectation for the different situations. And whoever has the reasonable expectation on their side, they're okay. And the person who broke the expectation, they're in trouble.
You're liable.
Yeah.
They're liable. All right, so that concludes chapter 6. Thank you very much.